Hi, welcome. My name is Jacob, and I'll be your host for this webinar today, together with two of my friends from Snowflake. But let's have a look at the agenda. So, first of all, I would like to point out that this webinar is being recorded, and I would also like to point out that we'll be just scratching the surface on some of the topics today, but we will be announcing follow-up webinars on selected topics so we can go into more detail on things mentioned in this webinar. Please also note there's a Q&A session at the end of the session, so you can feel free to ask questions there. We can follow up there, or if you prefer, you can also post the questions in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it, and then we can take the questions as we go along. I will also, or we will also share the slides after the session, so we'll send those to you as well. So with that being said, let's move on to the introductions. I do believe Henrik has some issues with the audio, Henrik from Snowflake. So he is joining us, but he has technical issues. So we will skip the introductions for Henrik and go straight into to David. So, David.
Hi, thanks, Jacob, and thanks for inviting me to the webinar. David Rickert, I work for Snowflake, principal architect in the field CTO team. I spend a lot of time talking with customers about SAP, how to get the data out, how to get the data in Snowflake, how to transform it, what the security is, hierarchies, unit conversion, these kinds of things. So we'll cover that out over in the next 20, 30 minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And I'm Jacob, and maybe I should also mention the topic of this webinar. So basically it is the how to use Snowflake Data Cloud together with SAP solutions. We're going to cover different things like integration options, tools, and so on, but also some of the more softer option topics like governance. But we'll come back to that in detail later. So I'm Jacob. I worked with SAP since '97, and always within, you can say, the professional services as a consultant, except for a year and a half where I joined Gartner as a senior director within business intelligence and AI. So I talked to a lot of clients on how to get data, especially out of SAP. There were also few clients that wanted to get data into SAP, but mostly out. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So first of all, I just want to start to discuss why we're having this webinar. Why are we discussing Snowflake Data Cloud and SAP? And why are a lot of SAP-focused clients already implementing or at least looking into adopting Snowflake? So that's where I'm going to start. So what does the typical data analytics landscape look like today? And why is there a need for something like Snowflake Data Cloud? So some of the challenges faced. Well, first of all our clients, they have really diverse data sources. They have a lot of different data sources. In the good old days when I started, you had your ERP system, SAP R3, you had a BW system, and if it was really complicated, you had to load flat files or connect to DB2 database. But that was it. Everything was structured data. Everything was loaded in batch every night. You had really predefined use cases on what you were going to do. You were probably going to do a fixed format report or maybe mail a report, and that's it. So also back then, the users, they were not as fluent in data analytics as they are today. So they had a lot less requirements. So basically, it was just a lot easier back then. Today, it has changed. So you have a lot of different data sources. You have semi-structured, unstructured data. You have different latency requirements ranging from batch to real-time streaming. You have a lot of analytics use cases. So not only descriptive and diagnostics, but also advanced analytics, predictive and prescriptive. These use cases can all be grouped within these 4 different categories, and they're quite different in terms of governance, in terms of requirements for the data, aggregation level, types of data, and so on. So it's a very mixed environment. And then you can say, well, how do these two sides of the equation basically match? How do you connect these two sides of the equation? In my experience, it happens kind of like this. So data follows the path of least resistance. So instead of taking kind of the paved route through the gates of governance and enterprise architecture, data seems to find its way around this and just takes the whatever is the easiest way. And that could be in terms of technology available, skills already available at the people who's actually going to do this. So it tends to find a really easy way to the consumers. That could be that sounds actually okay, but in reality, it does pose some issues because it starts out being fairly simple. So you start integrating your ERP system, your legacy system, external sources, and your line of business specific solutions to your enterprise data warehouse, and that's all good. But then somebody has a different requirement, has a different preference for where the data should go, the services that they want to use on that data, and so on. And then you start up doing integration from a lot of different systems to different, in this case, data cloud platforms or cloud data stores. You have Hadoop on-premise data lakes and so on. So you start using a lot of different components. Furthermore, then you also start figuring out, well, I have really good data in my enterprise data warehouse. I want to use that somewhere else. And you start moving data around between the different clouds and on-premise, basically. So you have intercloud, you have hybrid cloud, and so on. So a lot of things going on. It doesn't look nice in the picture, but it also has some consequences. So you have to maintain skills in all these platforms. There's a cost because it's often free or really cheap to get data into cloud, but it's often expensive to get it out. Plus, yeah, it's just hard to monitor. It's hard to tune and so on. So it complicates things basically. And then you start using these different data stores for all the different analytics use cases, which complicates matters even more. And to be honest, this picture is way oversimplified because on the analytics use cases, you'll have different front-end tools, different tools for doing AI and ML. You have different integration tools when you connect these different clouds. And within each of these boxes, there's a lot of services that you use as well. So it's fairly complicated. So what's the answer to this? One answer is, or one solution would be to implement an enterprise data platform and use that for, first of all, for all your analytics use cases. And then you could collect all the data in your enterprise data platform from the existing cloud data platforms and data lakes you have. But over time, it would make sense to kind of retire some of these to even simplify the image even more. So getting rid of all these connections, all these point-to-point integrations, and so on. And then consolidate all the data in one enterprise data platform, centralized place for governance, for doing all your data engineering, data management, and so on. So basically, it's being able to support most of, if not all, of the use cases that you need. I left in the enterprise data warehouse for a purpose, and that's, connecting all your data sources to your enterprise data platform. But I left in the enterprise data warehouse. Especially in an SAP context, it's not as easy to get rid of as some of the other systems. And there's some reasons for that. First of all, the way BW is built, you have the classical BW version where you're physically moving data from your ERP system across all the different layers in BW. And for each layer, you apply business logic. And when you reach the query, you have a lot of advanced functions, the OLAP function, so you can do restricted key figures, calculated key figures, unit conversion, currency conversion, hierarchies, and so on. So it's hard to kind of get the logic out of the query layer. It can be done, but there's not that many options for doing so. So that poses a challenge to actually, you can say, replace the BW functionality. It can be done, but it poses some issues. I'm going to come back to that. If it's the newer version, so if you're talking S4, you're talking BW4 HANA, it gets a little easier because things get simpler. So on the S4 HANA side, for instance, as an example, you have the AC.A table instead of thousands of finance tables. They're all consolidated in one table or one view. On the BW4 side, you're getting rid of InfoCube, so it's more relational structure. So it gets easier, but it still poses some challenges. If I'm going to dive into that, some of the challenges that I've discussed with clients, I had this conversation a lot of times with different clients on how to address this. On the data side, you have complex data models, thousands of tables. You have tables that are not relational, so you have pooled and clustered tables that are not that easy to extract. You have decades of business logic already applied to the system, and you have built-in structures for master data, info objects, and you also have quite detailed security, row-level security that is built into SAP. Those are all kind of hard to unravel and also hard to replicate. But it's not only the data. If you also look at the technology, you have SAP-specific interfaces and functions. You have the performance considerations on how is that going to affect my source system when I start extracting data from my ERP system. And that's why some vendors like HUR, they do log-based change data capture, so trying to relieve the pressure of the source system. So there's ways around that as well. And basically just figuring out what are the best technologies to use when I want to extract data from BW and load it into somewhere else, basically. The processes side also poses some challenges because you have very well-established processes around SAP. So there could be a resistance to change on that side. So there's very strict development, you can say, processes. How do we develop stuff? How do we test it in a three-tier environment, move it into production via transports and so on. So it's all very formalized. People on the people side, there could also be resistance to change because you're kind of shifting the power a little if you start exporting data out of SAP and storing it somewhere else. And then there's the whole thing about SAP people communicating with non-SAP resources because it's different terminologies. When you talk about business warehouse, things are called something different. It's a different concept compared to something like a standard relational enterprise data warehouse. So that's the terminology side. And then you have the whole governance, which kind of goes across everything, because when you have SAP, you often have very strict governance rules. So could be that you only want to keep SAP data within SAP, it should never leave SAP, or you can only use SAP tools on top of SAP data. So these are all the things you have to work around in order to extract data from SAP. So it sounds really hard, but it's not impossible. And that's why I'm going to leave it to David to discuss some of the options you have for extracting data out of the BW. He's also going to walk through some client examples on how it has been done. And then basically discuss what are the tooling options for extracting data, the native SAP provided tools, but also third-party tools. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to David, and he's going to give you an introduction on the Snowflake side.
Thanks for setting me up there, Jacob.
All up to you.
But yeah, with that, here, let me just share my screen, and we'll jump into the thick of it. So let me just make sure I've got that, and let me put that in slideshow presenter view. Maybe just to kick off is that Snowflake, we have roughly over 5,000 customers now, and actually several hundred of those are, if not, extracting and replacing parts of BW. They're pulling out SAP data and they're putting it into Snowflake just to make it easier to use and to share. So it might be a couple tables, or one of our biggest customers, it's almost 60 terabytes of data in a HANA database replacement. some of you may not know what Snowflake is, and it's going to be pretty high level today. But for the most part, the way it's marketed is it's a data cloud and it's a global network. So we have a data foundation. We store data and we have a compute, and because we're on top of Amazon or on top of Azure, on top of Google, this is this layer that you can run your compute in, you load your data and you report on it. And because it's the way we're structured is that you can then open up these valves and share that data with your ecosystem and across platform. So we have customers that are on AWS on the West Coast, and they do a replication to Azure on the East Coast of the US, and again also in Europe. So you just have this data mesh that's being built out worldwide, where it just makes it super easy to share your data and have it distributed regionally if you need so, and then also to work within your ecosystems to have that data. So that's probably one of the massive value adds that Snowflake has over any other solution, is that this global reach and being able to share. The second part I'll get into is like, one, access. I mean, Jacob's absolutely right. You need to govern your data, and traditionally companies such as SAP, Oracle, whatnot, on the transactional side, they're very much organization data, and then they have these discrete transactions, right? POPI across different systems as they're transacting, but they've never gotten to that level of massive amounts of data sharing and the analytics scale, the terabyte, the petabyte scales, where you're actually sharing this analytic information. That's the next step. That's the next generation. And so we see companies, they're standardizing on Snowflake, and then they're being able to, within their the business partners upstream, downstream, be able to share that data much more easily, as opposed to pushing files across in different ways. And we can go into more detail later, but because it's like one big sink, you just open up, and then people have instant access, if you allow them, of course, to, for example, your materials master data, attributes on that side. And so it just smooths that transition of sharing data from it might be several days before to just in seconds, and everybody's got the same vision of that, but across your whole ecosystem. And then third-party data, we have Snowflake Marketplace. We have basically about 1,000 our customers that are sharing and monetizing their data. It might be foot traffic for Starbucks, it might be weather data, it might be pandemic data, but because they share that, or competitive information marketing data, and instead, again, of before, where they're pushing that data out to the different customers, now they publish it. They can have a secure view on that, and each customer just sees the data they want, but that's immediately accessible. And then me, within my Snowflake interface, I say, okay, I've got my weather data, and I just do a select, and I combine it with my own data. And this can go to various levels of complexity, where you have what we call clean rooms and things like that. So being able to exchange aggregated data in a very secure fashion, and that's really on the uptick in the past 18 months, 20 months, where we're just growing exponentially on that. Governance, super important, and SAP got it right early on, and Snowflake's getting it right, and just built in the system. Everything's encrypted. If it's what do you call it? In your database, it's encrypted. If it's in flight, it's encrypted and goes across. And so, and then also fits very nicely into this concept of data mesh, where each group can have different control and governance over that. And for example, I might have, and we'll see this a bit later in the architecture, is that global IT might be managing all the master data, but then within a Snowflake account, you can have multiple or hundreds of databases, and each database might be different businesses, and you can share between these databases and select between databases. Action, and was the way that Snowflake was architected. Somebody mentioned in the chat, some kind of kind of like a lake, data lake, but the data lakes, no, that's kind of, data lake is like you're dumping data into blob storage and then in files, and then you have to pull it out again and use compute. Quite hard to do. As Jacob said, it's cheap to get into. Snowflake, it's different, is that you land the data, and we are using blob storage, but we're organizing it and governing it and encrypting it and accessing it in such a way that you can access it very easily. What's the most used interface on the planet is a SQL. And so you can access SQL if you wanted to use JavaScript or SQL stored procedures or Java or Python's in preview right now, or Scala. You can also access it through that way, right? Jupyter notebooks and leverage all of that. So data scientists can use it. Development teams are using it. Analysts can use it. They can all be using it all at the same time and against one or a common data set, but they're all using different kinds of compute. And I'll go into that in just a second, what we mean by these compute, or we call them virtual warehouses. So when data lands into Snowflake, it lands into it, and we ingest it, and we compress it, and we take lots of statistics on it. And actually, when we land it, we triplicate it. So it's very, very, very hard to get rid of unless you want to. And this, whether if we're on Amazon, then we'll use the Amazon blob storage. If we're using Azure, we'll use that, for Amazon S3 and things like that. But it's in our format. And then it's very easy to access. And then we have these compute clusters around that. Maybe we have one that's pulling in the data, another one that's people are using, for dev and quality within their own isolated environment. And if so, people can raise this up from, I don't know, 8, what we call extra small warehouse that might be around 8 CPU to 4,000 or 5,000 CPU within a couple of seconds. And it's not turning on or off machines. It's really you're pulling in clusters that we've already activated. If you pull it in, you compute, and then you turn it off. So you only pay for what you use when it comes in, and you can scale it up or out as you use it, and then you turn it off again. What's really interesting, so if we go more detail, right, if you might have an EC2 or whatever, if you're working in some other, if you're using some Amazon standard stuff or Azure stuff, they're actually, using the machine, and then you have to turn it off, and takes a certain amount of time, turn it on, and then takes a certain amount of time, and then turn it off and whatnot. But with Snowflake, we manage that. We have it on, so you can commute. It's just attaches, so it takes, less than a second to get that data. And what's important here is that you can have as many compute clusters as you want, hitting against the common database. And so there's two parts. You pay for the storage. It's around 23 euros per terabyte, compressed terabyte per month. And then on the compute is however many seconds you're running that compute, and it can turn off. So you only pay for what you use. Customers, right? We've got just a ton out there. The Siemens, Instacarts, the Capital One's probably our biggest. They have roughly 40 petabytes of data in Snowflake. But we also have customers, have a couple hundred gigabytes. It's really the way Snowflake is architected is a unified SQL engine at the very, very core of it, but built for the cloud, built for this enormous flexibility and scalability, and built for that compute. And then also along what we're saying with the security and whatnot. But for this audience, I think one of the most important customers that we have, not because you drink Coke, but so Coke One North America, there's a consortium, it's about 18 different distributors in the US, and they embarked on the SAP HANA journey 6-7 years ago. When I was at SAP, it was a very big thing. And they want to bring all their data into a common enterprise data warehouse and HANA and things like that. And, they just had issues. They had performance issues. They had stability issues, and nothing against HANA. I think it's a great technology, but it is just a single instance of, one big machine. And if something goes wrong, it all goes wrong. That's not the way Snowflake's architected. And they moved, and they're about 90% done now, over 18 months. They moved that whole HANA deployment onto Snowflake. And we're talking about 60 terabytes of compressed data. And the performance issue goes away, because now with these isolated computes, if you need it to run faster, you just dial up the compute and then you dial it back down. You do your cost analysis. Maybe it doesn't need to run fast, or maybe it's more of a stream or whatnot. But you have that choice now. And then all these different groups, the ingestion can be happening at the same time as the reporting, and there's just a lot of really good things that they can leverage from that. And so they get the stability, they got the performance. They've proven out that everything that you had in HANA, you can do in Snowflake. And so that was a really big win for us. And just, I think also what's really important, if we say, has allowed us to implement a robust self-service BI model. Now, I've been selling this idea for 20 years, right? Where you have self-service, like we have a semantic layer, we're going to make it easy for a business to connect to that and combine data and things like that, which it's a great, it's a great story. But up until now, one of the big things is like, hey, we need to really restrict, if we're on Oracle or if we're on SQL Server, whatnot, we need to restrict that compute, because we do not want this to fall over at the end of the year, and we don't at the end of the month, because there's too many people on it. Well, Snowflake, with this elastic compute that we call this a multi warehouse, and this is just the compute side. It as the number of users comes onto the system, the queries, it just expands out the compute gracefully, and then expands down the compute gracefully. You need more compute, you can dial it up in seconds. It's not anything anybody else can do. Now I just want to jump into a example, CPG customer, one of the largest SAP BW deployments on HANA in the world. A couple of years ago, they're like, we need to find what the next generation is. It's not clear what the roadmap is from SAP, and we need to be able to, overcome some of the restrictions that we have, the 90 million row limit on the BW side, and we need to be able to leverage that ecosystem, and we need to have in place a certain governance that we're not getting from Azure Lake. Also, because we're moving our whole SAP system into the cloud, we need to take a look. It's like, why not go cloud native? And then, of course, the costs of supporting some of these massive systems in memory and things like that. It's like, can we do it cheaper? And can we provide more business, make it easier for business to not only mix the SAP data, but all that sensor market data that we have in other silos, and bring that together. So we ran back in 2020, ran a minimum viable product. We pulled all the data, spend analysis data, landed it into Snowflake, and put a dashboard report on top of that. And proved it out, and they've decided, and they're unloading their SAP data onto HANA now. This is just classic SAP landscape, and Jacob mentioned it as well, as you have multiple layers. The PSA, DSO, cubes, info cubes, multi-providers. Of course, it gets more simple with PSA++. But there's nothing new to this. Of course, SAP they have the nomenclature for that, but this multi-tiered structure is definitely something that most companies are doing, whether they're using SAP or not. So it's pretty straightforward on that. What they moved from, and they're a massive company, and they have 7 production BW systems, so 28 systems with test, dev, quality, and things like that. And I said, we want to move all those systems onto one Snowflake account based in Europe. And so to do that, there's architected in such a way that within an account, you can have one or several databases, and they can be any size, right? They can start from 0, go up to how many petabytes that you want. There hasn't been a limit yet. And so one part is like, hey, corporate shared database, this is where we're going to put all the master data. We're going to do the raw, the integration scheme, presentation schema. They can use whatever modeling they want, but this is governed by, heavily governed by global IT. And then they give different called the data warehouses, but basically databases, and then they have as much or as little compute as they want on that side. So one business in the U.S. is running there, and they're doing data vault modeling, and they're running the tooling that they want on top of that, whether it's Tableau, Power BI, anything that's ODBC or JDBC. And then to get the master data, instead of creating these pipelines each time, all they have to do is like ask for access, and it gets opened up to them, and then they can mix their data with the corporate data. So for the global part, they have kind of a chargeback for that, but then within each of the individual businesses and regions or whatnot, they can have their own compute, and they just pay for what they use, and they don't pay for what they don't use, and it's a fantastic thing. And then everybody has access to, if they're building out the supply chain, if they're building out distribution logistics, they can open up these, create these private exchange with the business partners. If it's more competitive data that they want to pull in, or foot traffic or marketing, so they just go to the marketplace and access it. And then also for all these little projects, right? There's thousands of MS SQL databases out there for little projects that they have to spin up, and then they have to pull the data in for the master data they want. Well, now they just like turn it on, takes a couple of seconds, they get the access they need, and then just report on it. So, and then also, right, test, dev, production, quality, all these things why were they separated before? Because there's afraid of failure, and it's going to crash the system. So you have different systems. Well, in Snowflake, because you have this isolated compute, is that you can logically separate these things out. And then we have something called zero copy clone. Maybe I have 80 terabytes of production data, and now I can say, hey, just make a clone of that, points to it, it creates a what we call zero copy clone, and it just allows you in an isolated, protected environment to, if you want, run, performance tests against a copy of the production data, but it doesn't take any more space. And if I make changes to this copy, it just takes the changes in the copy. So it's a very economical way of one, getting copies of the data as opposed to moving and pushing data all around, and two, it allows you to have these test and dev systems in the same area, which allows an easier way for moving, right, transporting those between the different systems. Of course, this is the target architectures. You have ECC, either lighten or replace BW. And just to be super clear, right, BW is an application that's on top of a database. We're a powerful SQL engine. But there's some things we don't, or we haven't built out is a planning, right? We don't have, if you can do light planning, but we don't have that planning or consolidation piece that an application has. And so we do have partners that are building on top of Snowflake, these analytic applications. And if you want to take a look at it, it's called something called powered by Snowflake. So target, it's like lighten BW as much as possible. Keep the pieces that you need. But then, okay, you're either going to have more capacity on the BW to use it for other things, or you can move those HANA licenses that you have towards that big S4 project that's coming up. But of course, stepwise, reality is not always so simple. Is that a lot of customers, their first step is like, okay, we need to provide this data to our business users, and we have to provide it immediately to show business value. So we're going to leverage BW as that modeling component, as that tool, right? You have your dimensions and facts, and we're just going to offload it, initial load, delta load, and these kinds of things into Snowflake, make it accessible to our data scientists, analysts, and whatnot, and then move over workflow by workflow. So there's the two things that we see is that the customers that are doing this business case by business case, hey, Snowflake doesn't cost anything until you start running the compute on it. And then as a business case, it's going to go up. And then the idea is that the other charges are going down because you're using them less, or you've reattributed to other components. And then that also gives IT the time to move and go directly and simplify the architecture, right, where you're going directly against those CDS views or you're using the extractors and whatnot and going directly to Snowflake. Now the question always comes up is like, how do you do it? how do you get that data out? There's two main ways. There's SAP way. SAP Data Services 14.2 SP14 has a supported Snowflake connector. So it's pulling data out at the level that you need, right? Whether it's at the application level and you're going through the SAP Operational Data Provisioning API, and then landing that into Snowflake, and it manages the initial load and the delta loads. And behind this API, and this is exactly how SAP does it to pull the data from ECC into BW, right? We're using exactly the same mechanism. We're using and exactly the same data, right? If you have those SAP extractors that are sitting in S3, a lot of that logic, and Jacob mentioned, is like in the BW. Well, it's actually, a lot of it's been done already in the SAP side, and you can just re-leverage it, but then you're pointing to Snowflake. In transition, right? ODP can have multiple destination, et cetera, et cetera. And this, of course, can also front CDS views. I put BW in here because if you have a regional global system, then it's the same mechanism. If BW is a source to another BW, it's going across there. SLT, it's been around for something like 40 years. It's a SAP replication component, and you can use this in combination with ODP and data services to get that into Snowflake. So that's one way. You already have the tooling. Why not leverage that? More of the data intelligence side, I just put it there. It's more, it's more transactional. It's more a discrete amount. So for me, it's not really that big batch thing. And then, of course, people say, hey, wait, maybe it's too complicated. I'm just like a mom and pop shop. And so I need to, I just need to get the data out. Well, you can also just copy the tables, but I want to show something that's more industrial, where you have, the initial load and delta load and using the same mechanisms that SAP are using. And then the second way of getting data out is using a third-party tool. So there always needs to be something between today, right? Between SAP and Snowflake or any relational database. What we see a lot of customers are using, they're moving to Fivetran, which just acquired HVR. And HVR is a change data capture mechanism. So it's hitting against the log files on that database. It runs 24 hours a day, and you get that near real-time action. We also see that with Click Replicate. That can do CDC, but it can also, and I haven't put the arrow in there, can also go directly against that application layer. Another super interesting tool is called DataVard. They're a silver partner with SAP. They've been pulling data out, archiving it, splitting SAP systems for years, 20 years now. It's basically an application inside of SAP. It generates these extractors and it pushes it directly into Snowflake. Last but not least, you can also, because ODP is also an OData point, you can use Azure Data Foundation, AWS Glue, and things like that to pull it out. There's a lot of documentation on that. They usually talk about moving to one of their own databases, but you can use exactly the same technology to move to Snowflake. It's super interesting as well. It's like if you're using Kafka, and we have Snowflake as a Kafka connector, then a company in it, they did ODP to Kafka. Jacob, do I still have time, or should I continue?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Sometimes I'm not sure if anybody's still there. Okay, thanks. And then, okay, so that's getting data into Snowflake. You can use, and best practices is to land it as raw as possible. Use that Snowflake compute and augmented, extended SQL functionality, right? We have recursive for hierarchies. We have common table expressions. We have SQL stored procedures. We have JavaScript. We have Java. We have you can also connect with we're in preview with that with the Python and connect with the notebooks, and Scala is already out there, and you can build these workflows out within those toolings, or you can get more of a how do you say, these automated data warehousing tools like DBT is open source for the desktop. And then if you want to use Data Vault, there's a module you can put in dbt. There's also a lot of tools out there like Warescape and whatnot. This one is because I get this question a lot. It's like some of these big companies, pharmaceuticals and whatnot, they've decided to standardize on SAP Analytics Cloud. Sold Analytics Cloud for years, and they say, and we don't want to disturb the business users. How do we get, now that we have this access to this big data and the terabytes or petabytes, how can we bring that into Analytics Cloud? Again, in the yellow, it's kind of the what SAP, the connectivity that SAP's built out to Snowflake. So cloud platform integration, open connector. So that's more, discrete amounts of data. Business objects 4.3 has a Snowflake connector. You can push it up through. It's a great product, but it's lost a lot of steam against Tableau and Power BI. But they do have that supported connector, and you can push that through, and then SAC can consume universes. And then, HANA SDI, it's ODBC, JDBC, a remote table connection. You can set that up. And of course, as it's exposed in HANA, then it can be exposed to BW and back through there. It's a great idea. I was really happy about, learning that like 18 months ago. The thing to watch out is, however, is the quantity of data that you're trying to pull through, as this federation engine hasn't, it's there and it works really well if it's HANA to HANA. But I would just do your due diligence and test it out if you want to bring data through there. So just to summarize, why Snowflake with SAP, and then I crossed it out to all data. Is like, one, the different workloads. It's not just enterprise data. It's not just it's not your finance, accounts receivable, things like that. It's also the sensor data and the market data, and the ease of getting market data from your ecosystem. So you can pull in the structured data. You can pull in semi-structured, so you have JSONs. If you want to have mixed JSON arrays with the structured data, it's all in one table. It's a first-class citizen. Unstructured data, so your images and text and things like that can be brought in and brought under this one government management. It's like, okay, HANA can do it. Well, HANA can do everything, but you're talking about something that's 10 times cheaper, more flexible, and is really built for it. Then it just works, right? There's no data, there's no hardware, there's no software upgrade, there's no service windows. It's just easy to use Snowflake. It's like you load the data and you run queries against the data. All that other stuff, the partitioning that you have to do, or these proprietary interfaces like HANA Studios, it's not ANSI SQL standardized. You can use you can standardize, or you can not standardize, but you can use these standards that just keeps your system open. And of course, we want you to use Snowflake, but on the other hand, it's like we understand that we need to provide that quality of service, and we're not trying to of course we want to make it sticky, but being open to that ecosystem is hugely important, especially as technology is changing so rapidly. And then connected to Matter, right? You can extend your access and collaboration intra-company and then intercompany across the cloud, across clouds, so you're not tied into any particular hyperscaler. And we do this in a really secure way. So thank you, and I'll pass that off to Jacob, and then I think we also have the question and answer. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave. Just going to share my screen again. And start the presentation. So that was a lot around the, thank you so much, David, for this. It definitely shows that it can be done, and we're currently working at NTT Data Business Solutions with a lot of clients on scenarios exactly like this. So how to best integrate SAP and Snowflake. But as I also mentioned earlier, and David also mentioned it, there's more to it than just data and technology. To me, one of the most important things is, is governance. And it's also one of the hardest things to get right, because if we make it too restrictive, then in my experience, as I mentioned, data takes the path of least resistance. So, and that means it ends up in Excel. Um, and if we make it too loose, then something else happens. Then to me, it's kind of like turning this knob on the steering wheel of a Ferrari, where you kind of switch on the electronic stability control, because then things can go wrong really fast. So too little governance is also a bad thing. I had clients that had no governance and implemented Tableau, just as an example. 3 months later, they had 8,000 Tableau documents. So you need to put some sort of control, but it's really hard to get the balance right. But what is kind of the current state of affairs for data analytics governance? I pulled a survey from Gartner that surveyed 100 plus companies. And the amazing thing is that only 18% said that their data analytics governance was mature and scaling across the enterprise. And to me, governance is not only rules, it's also enablement, support, and so on. That's also governance. So not the strict sense of governance that you normally think of. According to time, I'll leave room for the Q&A session, so I won't go into detail on this survey. But I will highlight that what it shows is there is kind of a discrepancy between the success perceived by data and analytics governance initiatives that is led by IT. So if IT is leading it, they're saying, well, we consistently produce clear business value for the organization in 66% of the time. Whereas if you ask business-led initiatives, they say, well, it's only around 18%. This could mean that IT is just way better at implementing data analytics governance than the businesses, but this document actually kind of says that that's probably not the case. Maybe they're being too overly optimistic. So it's just to say that this is hard. It's hard to get right, and I'm going to show you in a second what the five, you can say, kind of the top 5 issues that we see is. So there's more to it. There's more questions. One thing also I would highlight is that when we talk about compliance and regulatory targets, so GDPR and so on, it's actually way better. So they a higher rate of success across the board for all types of initiatives, which is good. So I'll skip this one. And just jump straight into what the biggest issues are. First of all, it's the lack of business leadership in data analytics governance initiatives. Surveys from Gartner has shown that the amount spent by business is almost on data analytics is almost the same as what IT spends. So in order for this to work, it's extremely important that IT and the business cooperate on these initiatives and the business gets involved, because otherwise you end up with these silos, not only from a technical perspective, but also from a governance perspective. So involve the business basically. Then there's the one-size-fits-all governance. That's what we see a lot in the SAP world. So you just have strict governance across the board. But for these different analytics use cases, it's quite different whether you're implementing a dashboard or a enterprise report in a PDF you want to mail, or you're doing advanced analytics in R and Python on unstructured or semi-structured data. So you can say using or having this adaptive governance, that's quite important. Another one is not tracking the governance investments against the business value. So actually just saying we need governance, but not really considering or following up, well, does it actually match what we're looking for, or does it support the business initiatives we have? So that's another one. Focusing on the wrong metrics is kind of connected to this, but maybe it's you have a KPI saying how much data do we clean, instead of looking at, well, what are the data and analytics governance initiatives we have? What are they supporting? Are they supporting preventing customer churn or adhering to GDPR directives and so on? So kind of trying to find the right metrics to be able to determine whether your data and analytics governance is actually a success or not. And then this silo-based governance approach, meaning that a lot of clients say, well, we're going to start out with the data governance, and once we have that in place, we're going to look at some of the others, like our ML ops or our governance of advanced analytics projects and so on. So that leaves some of the areas of data analytics ungoverned, maybe because you're focusing on one thing. So taking a more holistic approach could be the way forward. So that's the biggest issue. So, and I won't go into the solutions because time don't allow, and I want, of course, you to reach out to us so we can help you. But maybe it could be time to press the pause button and say, well, on our data analytics governance side, are we actually doing the right thing? So what is the current state of affairs for our initiatives? Are they working? Are they supporting the business initiatives we have? Are they actually creating value instead of putting you can say a block into our business initiatives and the way people are working? And of course, we can help you do so. We have experience in this, we have templates for it, procedures and so on, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. So just to stress, I think governance is extremely important to get the success you want from an enterprise data platform. So it's not only technology and it's not only focusing on data. So the last thing I'm going to touch on is how to get started. And of course, I hope this has come across. We're already helping clients do this. And whether it's a matter of figuring out how to extract the data, what technologies to use, what are the best processes to build around this, how do we enable, train people, and how do you build a governance model that can support your enterprise data platform? Well, we can help you in all these areas. We have different service offerings around this. So on Snowflake and SAP data integration, data platform assessments, governance roadmaps, and so on. So we have a catalog of service offerings that we can deploy to help you. But we also have, you can say, utilities and accelerators. And I won't go through all of them, but I do want to highlight one that we receive funding from NTT Data in Japan, which is an SAP SLT connector that can allow you to extract real-time data from SAP into Snowflake. And it's not only the technical part, but it's also pre-built data models, ingestion layers, and so on. So for if you say, well, we want to get all our finance data out of SAP, we have pre-built, or we're working on creating pre-built data models for that. So you hook up SAP SLT, extract the data, and it fills the target models in Snowflake. And I also want to highlight that we have this global cooperation because we're from NTT Data Business Solutions, but we're part of NTT Data Global that has a huge Snowflake footprint. So they have a lot of use cases, a lot of experience within this area that we can also draw upon. So that was the end of it for David and I. I hope we give you at least a preview of the challenges involved in extracting data from SAP, but also showing you that it can actually be done and that you need to think on, you can say, on a wider scale and not only focus on the data and the technology. So by that, I'm going to open up for the Q&A session. I haven't checked the chat yet, so I'll do that as well. So yeah, and of course, as Henrik said, if on the technical side to get started, it's quite easy because you can start up a Snowflake trial, you can buy some credits, and then you're up and running quite easy. So it's really easy to get started on that note.
Yeah, thanks, Philip and David. I think we have some questions we've been answering in the chat, but maybe we can just reiterate them here if we have some time left. I was thinking, so there was a question from Philip Pudlo around extracting data. I think that was already answered in the chat, but maybe David, you can just give your thoughts around this. How do you handle filtering and deltas when you're doing the extraction from SAP ERP to Snowflake?
Maybe I didn't get I was at the very top there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, it always comes up with the has nothing to do technically. It's what SAP says you can do. And then so you have the right to get your data out of SAP ERP directly, right? As long as you don't push data back into the SAP, so you're changing it and then pushing it back in. But it's, from analytics, you absolutely have the right to do that, and that's why a lot of companies just do directly SAP ERP, simplify. If they have that BW piece, they reduce it. Once the data goes into BW, however, SAP says it's their IP, and that you have to pay to get it out, which is crazy. But up to BW 7.5, there's a license called an Open Hub license, and with that, you're allowed to get the data out. And then they just integrated that license into the BW4 side. But obviously talk to the SAP on that side of things. But that's where it is. And then this idea of if you're hitting against the database or not is like, usually if you're hitting against transactional database, you have to have an enterprise license, whether it's Oracle or SAP HANA or whatnot. The CDC, change data capture with HVR, click replicate's different because it's not hitting against the database. It's hitting against log files, which is perfectly fine. But it gets a bit involved. But there's documentation out there from the SAP side and whatnot. What other companies are pulling it out? And then of course you can just, at the end of the day, you can just use some transaction on the SAP and push it out. Right, as the first step, you want to be able to test out mixing Snowflake, so you can just offload that into a CSV and bring it into Snowflake for initial stuff, and then you can get the plumbing right in the second step.
Okay, thanks. One more question from Pierre Doriac, he's asking if you could please provide a link or documentation related to the SAP SLT to Snowflake integration components. Is that something we can provide, Pierre?
Yeah, I can. You can say if it's our component, it's still under development. Yeah. But what I can send, I'll put it in the chat. That's the documentation for this SAP operational data provisioning, which also uses SLT together with data services, and you could use that to extract data from SAP and then write it into Snowflake, basically in a real-time manner, because it uses a special feature of data services to achieve that. So I'll put that in the chat.
Okay, excellent. I think that's pretty much all the questions we had. Unless there are any last-minute questions that we want to bring in here.
Doesn't seem like it.
Okay.
Do you expect to have follow-up sessions with more case-by-case deep dives? That could be a topic. I would say in general, if you have any topics you would like us to address in a webinar, feel free to reach out and submit those topics, and we'll take it into consideration. But it could definitely make sense to have deep dives on some of the cases.
I mean, I didn't even touch on how we can handle hierarchies in a super efficient way. All the different security mechanisms we have, data masking, row level, all these different fantastic things on the Snowflake side. So, and yes, we will share the presentation.
Yes, we will share the presentation afterwards. So we're almost at the hour. Key comes. Oh, there's more questions coming in.
Well, now they're all coming in. It's a really good question. Martin's question: what are the key competencies you should have in order to be successful? Maybe I'll let Jacob cover that part. Or I can.
You can say, to me, the tricky part, that's the SAP part. So it's actually understanding the data models, the data structures, and then extracting data from SAP, choosing the right tools dependent on your requirements. And when you're on the Snowflake side, I mean, things get easier from a technical perspective, but you still need to build your data models and so on. So I would say at least SAP skills, but you also need to have data modeling skills in order to build the structures in Snowflake and so on. That's on the technical and the data side. And then there's the whole thing around governance, enabling people, training people, and so on, which is also important. But I don't know, do you have anything to add, David?
Yeah, people's like, oh, the people that are working on the BWs are like super smart people, and they like can pick this up really easily, even if they're using, at the end of the day, it's joins and it's and whatnot, and just opens up the possibilities of what they're able to do. But yeah, definitely it's a SQL, and then there's tooling out there that you can put on top, right? The DBT vaults to make that more of an automated material. So it depends on how, do you want to code or do you want to have some, and there's usually applications on top of Snowflake that'll help you with that. And then Morten has, is it possible to use extractors in AECC as connectors directly to Snowflake? There always needs to be a piece between, so even you can expose these extractors through ODP, and then it's an OData source, but you need to have something that's going to hit that OData and bring it to Snowflake, whether it's Azure or whether it's AWS Glue or whatnot. There needs to be a component between that. Hopefully, in the future, I can't talk too much about it. You will be able to do that, but I can't say anything. See how it goes.
One last question. I think we're just over time, but if Morten is still on, Morten Kaiser is asking, is it possible to use the extractors in SAP ECC as connectors directly to Snowflake?
That was the one David just answered.
Yeah, not today. You need to have a piece to move that OData into cloud storage where it can be picked up by Snowflake. You could use a Kafka connector from Init, and then we pick up the Kafka. So that's one thing to do.
Excellent. So 2 minutes past the hour. I want to thank you for your participation and for all the good questions. It's cool to keep it interactive, and we'll be back with more sessions. Oh, so that's another one. Oh, that was a comment.
We can look into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And that's I think that's similar to what I was saying about the Kafka API. But yeah. Okay. Great.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.